Hello, class. Welcome to our first day. We're going to be talking about gesture drawing. And what we're going to do is I'm going to talk first about the ideas that I have up here and what gesture is all about. So gesture is basically meaning movement that connects. And so your first idea is going to be, what does that mean? What is movement that connects? So basically, if we take a shape, or what we'll also call an enclosure, and if I put those down there, these are shapes, and the movement that's going to connect it is going to be this line. Basically, gesture is movement that's connecting shapes and relationships. So, movement that connects. You want to remember that? Our first idea with gesture that I'm going to get you to think about is what we call CSI lines. What that basically means is you're only going to be using lines that are basically concave, convex, and if you put those two together, you end up getting an S. That's where the S comes from, and you're going to be using straights. So I'm going to have you reduce all of your lines to very simple ideas of C, S, and I. The other idea that I have up here, known as the longest axis, an axis line is a directional line. So in an enclosure, every shape will have an axis line, or every enclosure will have an axis line.
I can't see over there.
And so mostly for us, the axis line and shape of something is going to be crucial in the gesture drawing. So we're going to identify first what's the major axis line. You can wrap a shape, get the axis line. If we can get the axis line of all of our major shapes, you're well along your way into what we call gesture drawing. The next idea that we're going to use is known as stretch and pinch. Stretch and pinch basically is an idea where if I took an angle here and took an angle here, and began to connect these two sides, and then like an accordion shape, had this as a bend to it, is what you're going to do is you're going to see a central axis line moving this way, kind of like a person's torso, if you will. If there was a head up here going in this direction, or a leg coming through, we can know our movements are going to have a direction to them. Like this is going to do this, and then we're going to get this doing this, which is known as our next one, which I don't have up here, which is known as interlocking rhythms. We're also going to look for that you're going to find in all kinds of objects that you draw. But this is our stretch side, this is our pinch side. So if we take a shape and use two rectangles like this, is what you're going to do is you're going to see one side very tight and one side very open. And so we're always trying to look for, in any object we do, the parts that it's composed of, and then how those parts work in relation to each other. The last one, as we already talked about, is an enclosure. An enclosure is just the shape. And enclosure is a word we use for design, so that we can then begin to see how one enclosure works to the next and works to the next, which can create relationships. So what I'm going to do is show you guys a little bit from this object, and we're going to think a little bit about longest axis. And longest axis line, now when you're thinking of something like this, if you're starting it as a gesture, we're going to start off right away with the longest axis line, and it's doing this. And then we're going to begin to, I'm going to begin to maybe shape it a little bit and think of it like moving in this direction and doing this, my longest axis line. Then I'm going to begin to use an enclosure for the head. So we're thinking of just generalizations here, how these things connect. In relation to this head, I'm going to look, and you'll do the same. You'll overlap. So I'm watching her collar. And her collar overlaps. If I continue the line up, it overlaps. And then the bottom of it does this. It's easy to get rid of once you have it in place. We're going to watch how the shoulders peek through, and the shoulders are coming through about here. And now I'm going to put just a little more of a shape to it. And underneath there, we'll get the feel of where the shoulders are. And in there, the next thing we're going to want to do is watch a little bit of a height. And I'm going to estimate it like you will on a gesture. We're not going to measure it out totally. And we're going to estimate these legs and roughly how high they come. And so again, you're going to look at them as directions. You're going to have guidelines in there. When I measured it, it was about a little less than halfway. So I'm going to say that's going to be pretty close. And so then we're going to take these shapes and you can develop them a little further. An arm is a gesture, meaning axis line. What's the axis line of its direction? You watch its simple bend. The hand takes a turn, maybe a shape. And so you take the bend and the shape, again, the axis line of this one. I'm watching it in relationship to this leg. The leg comes out a little further. So you got to keep watching directions and axis lines and relationships of one part to the other, because gesture is how these parts all work together to create a whole. And that would be basically our gesture. It wouldn't go much further than that for this little figurine. So the idea is relationships between this and this and this and this. So we're trying to get our relationships and staying away from detail at all costs. Now is what I want to show you something with is what we would call pinch and stretch. So if I take a little stuffed animal like this, and if I bend them maybe in such a way, so what we're going to look for is, like when I put pinch and stretch up here, the idea is how does the head connect to the body? How do the arms connect to that? So what is the relationship? So when I look at it, I begin to see a direction for a head, and the stretch is on this side. So now the head is connecting to the body. So there's our movement that connects. This is coming down this side. If I cut off his leg, there'd be this angle. If I cut off his legs in the front, and indeed there's this angle, this would come up. This is coming over. The axis line running through his face is this way. So then I can begin to curve this and watch the general characteristic of this axis line of his head as a shape, and we'll bring it around. So we get this. So he still looks quite abstract. However, we got our axis line this way. We've got our axis line this way, the front of it doing this, and he's well along his way. So now I'm going to look at the leg that's up in this area, and I begin to see, if I look into him, I begin to see a direction doing this. Here's my interlocking curves. I get one this way, this way, this way, and here's my pinch, and this is my stretch. So this is connecting leg to foot, pinch on the other side, which I need you to look for those constantly within the objects you draw. If you notice, I'm using nothing but concaves, convex, straight lines. We're keeping these things as we talked about. So when I look at the leg to the foot, I'm watching here, and then I see a pinch. And I know you probably can't see my little object, but the pinch is on this side. So right away, where is the pinch? Curve. These flow together. So there might be some subtle changes, but you connect them the way that they go. You draw over what you originally placed down. Into this thing, I can begin to look and say there's a little eye right there. Okay, so you watch where is its placement. I could even watch with my legs where, if I drove them up, where would they go, roughly where the eye is. This one, whoops, if I get them right. This one, I've got them a little long, but I'm going to leave it. Ear, watches direction, watch the axis line, watch its size, and then begin to place it in. Edit what's underneath it. We get a little perspective, so you get the one basically on the other side. Last thing I'm going to do is put on this arm that's the closest to me. And so this one is coming along, it moves through, and then you get the, oops, hold on here, get them in the right place. It's going to come all the way down here, and then come all the way up and connect here. I'll rub this out, so now this is in front of that, and that's where I'm going to leave my little character, okay? So pinch and stretch. We get rid of these. I'm going to show you one last gesture drawing before you will begin to draw. And then we'll talk a little bit about working in notional space. If you take a character like this, if you're drawing from a figurine, some of the cases you will, is what we do is we try to find some consistency between our parts. So now is what we have is a head, a body, lower part, legs, and you say, how do they all go together? So if I take a general line, is what you're going to find the leg seems to cut to her back and cuts through right here on her head. So what I'm going to do is start that way. I'm going to start off with my general direction. Now, we're not measuring all this out right now, so it could come out of proportion. Our bottom looks like it's doing this. I could get a general if we want to. Usually general measurements, which are sometimes good without breaking it all down. If I go from the bottom of her arm, it looks like it's roughly to the top. So I'm going to take a general direction doing that just to give myself something to think about. And then this is my longest axis line running through. When I look at roughly where her head would be, I would do this. And I'm just going to take a shape and as a very general loose shape, come up with a long axis line as a shape, trying to get the feel of what it is that I'm seeing. Platform is doing this. Then I can follow the angle back of her head, and it's following, watch your angles. If you use a pencil, check your angles. I know from my measurement that we started with, that's my plane break, as you'll know it to be soon. This angle, if I drive it through as I'm looking, it comes to the bottom of her hat. So I'm going to kind of take a general direction. And so even at that early stage, it starts to give us a little bit of the idea of what it is that I'm seeing. Now I'm going to watch this general angle coming all the way to the muff. And I know that's roughly my midway point, so I'm going to place a shape in there. So now I've got one shape, enclosure, another enclosure, one going on here. And now I'm going to watch her hip, and I begin to see an enclosure doing this. So now I've got a series of enclosures. I've got a stretch, a pinch within the object. Now we're going to take the back side of the dress, and it's going to come this way. The bottom of the skirt doing this. Begins to make a nice angle this way, and then connecting in. So there's our general gesture. And so you should be able to get to it within a minute or two. I'm going to put a general foot, and oops, my angle, I'll put a general foot here, and another one back over here, just peeking through. So there's our general gesture of this figure. Our very last one that I want to talk about is going to be notional space. Now, what all of you will be doing is, at this point, you'll be shutting off this video, and I'm going to have you take several objects, and you're going to be doing gesture drawings of them as I just mentioned. So you're going to, at home, you're going to pick a few objects, set it up, do a gesture drawing, thinking of it this way. Do not do contour line drawings. Think constantly about the relationships of the parts, watching your axis lines to your various enclosures, watch the pinch and stretch and all the things we just talked about. And then once you're done with this part of it, you'll be spending about 20 minutes doing that. Then flip the video back on, and I'm about to show you the next part of what we call notional space. So now we're resuming with notional space. Notional space basically is coming up with the measurements of the height and width of the object that you're drawing. So is what we're going to be doing is now you have to measure the object. So I'm going to do this little cat wearing a hat. It's nice to have a stick like I have here, or if you have a pencil, that works out great because you're going to have to measure what's the highest and to what's the widest. So I'm going to do that. When I take my width measurement, I'm going to measure from the end of the hat to the end of its body. And when I measure up, it comes up to about her eye. So what I'm going to do is, this could be at any height that we would like it. So I'm going to place it here. So I'm going to say this is how big I'm going to make it. And so you can make it any size. I could make it as small as this, and it would always work. And I could make it as big as the wall, and it would work. That's what's so beautiful about the system. Now I know it came up to the cat's eye. So I'm going to estimate it here. I'm going to say it's roughly here. So you're kind of guessing at it in light of its size. And then I'm going to run my line, and I'm going to check it. And so I know the hat is the furthest point out. I know the distance of the hat from one side to the other is equal. So what I'm going to try to do is estimate a distance on this side, coming on this side. I take that hat, measure over, drop a line, take the hat, measure over, should be equal. And so that's what I'm going to do to try to get a symmetry to it. And then I drop my line from the edge of the hat, and there's some of the cat left over, not a lot. So about, I'm guessing at it at about like that. So I'm gonna see if this space works. I'm thinking it's a little too narrow, and so I'll have to go back at it. So what I've got to do is widen this just a little bit for the size that I have it, widen this just a little bit, and you might run into the same situation. So now I'm taking a stick plus this plus, and I'm very close to where I want it to be. So I'm gonna keep it at this measurement. So there's my notional space to the height to the width. I'm gonna lightly get rid of these. So the first part of this is doing a fair amount of measuring. It's going to give us a self-contained space where ultimately our extremes are going to hit. So I know that the cat's hat got to hit here, his backside has got to hit here, and the lowest point has got to hit at the bottom. So I'm going to be working it out in that sense. Now, what I have to do is figure out how high. So if I take a head length and come down once, and then I measure up, it's about half of that. So I have to guess and say if this is the head and the hat connected, and then I measure that down, is that half the distance? And all of us would say no. So I'd make this space a lot bigger, and I'd say the head and the hat has got to be that. This comes down to there. This looks like it's going to work out. That's about half the distance, which now works out well for my measurements. So now I'm measuring the height. So now I can take, and I know the cat's head is going to be there. And so now I'm going to make a generalized shape. And then knowing that, I'm going to take this, and I'm going to bring around what I see, and it's going to angle up a little bit like this. And I know this distance should be equal to this distance because I've already measured it. The top of its head has this flower, so I'm going to gesture it in. So you're going to start with your big simplistic shapes, watching how this lines up with this. Keep watching always relationships in this process. I'm going to round this out just a little more. From that general characteristic that I have here, I'm going to place a line, and I'm going to begin to try to break it up into some shapes if I can. I know that his hip has to hit here. When I look at where his hip hits there, it is not parallel to my front plane, it's back further. So I'm going to try to get a sense of where that is. And then once I have that, I'm going to connect the dots, so to speak. And so now I'm going to run this line over to it. This is going to connect and ultimately come through. The other side, just thinking of its shape, loosely define the head. The leg, take your lines, run them up, and it's coming roughly where this eye is. So this is going to be a pretty close idea. Foot, sticking out, again, very general shapes. Parting of the legs, about here. This one's going to be a little lower because of the perspective. We got a little bit of an angle going in this direction. Other leg, and then we're going to get our placement of the tail. Hat, I'm going to pull it out, trying to keep my spaces equal. Angles in and around. This one swings in a little bit. The top of it is going to begin to connect. I'm going to refine it just a little bit, try to get my line just a little clearer. We're almost got them. Tail coming through. A few little subtle details, but we're going to leave them. Keep your guidelines always in place. Okay? That's our notional space. If you have any time, break it up subtly. And then what I'm going to do is check a measurement that I originally started with. Here to the eye should go up a little bit. Okay, so all the measurements are pretty close. It's a touch bit wider than it ought to be. Other than that, we're pretty close. So I'm going to leave it here for the end of this video. So now is what you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking, as it will say on canvas, you're going to be taking some other objects and you're going to be doing gestures of them, but you got to start it with the notional space. This is known as a sustained gesture. It enables us to get more accuracy than the first ones. And I will see you again in a couple of days.